Anders and Lisa were staying at Dulwich College on the island and had come to our hospital to register at the Norwegian embassy. Anders is Swedish, but Lisa is Norwegian, and he'd lived in Norway for a long time, so they came under the auspices of the Norwegian embassy. I asked him what we could do to help him, and he asked, "What are you doing to help the others?" I told him that he could use our resources and make a missing poster, and we can arrange to distribute them. I told him that we were also in close contact with the recovery teams in various areas and could register Ragnar's details on a newly set up central database. I also mentioned to him that later that day we were hoping to have mobile phones for him to use, but for now he was free to use ours. He'd heard a rumour that a lot of Western children had been taken to a temple in the hills beyond Taquapar, and he wanted to know how likely that seemed to me. I explained that it was entirely possible, but advised him against going out there until we had a chance to check it out for him. He agreed. I showed him where our computer room and printers were, and I sat with him whilst he made his missing poster. We then arranged to have several hundred photocopies made, but on that day so far we didn't have any transport to take them to Khao Lak. This naturally didn't seem soon enough for Anders. And then I had an idea. I called a guy that I knew called Andy Kerr, who was building a luxury resort up there, and amazingly, I got through to him first time. My idea was to email to him the missing poster that Anders had just made, and then he could get someone to copy it and get them posted in the relevant areas. He agreed immediately, and this was done. Ragnar's first missing posters were on display in Khao Lak within an hour of being made by Anders, and Anders and his wife did not have to go up there in their beat-up state. Andy emailed us some photos of the posters being put up. What a great idea. I asked the rest of the volunteers to do that whenever they put posters up in places, especially on the mainland. This would be proof to the families that we were actually doing what they wanted to be done and what they would have done. Up until this point, I hadn't actually met Ragnar's mum. She was sat near the food table of the embassy. She looked utterly lost, and I was a bit awkward about approaching her. It didn't seem the right time yet. A few hours later, our first exchange took place by accident. I was hungry and headed for the food table. On the table was a pristine virgin jar of Nutella chocolate spread. I dipped my finger right in, scooped a lump out, and ate it. I said to anyone who cared to listen, somewhere, wherever she is in the world, my mother knows I just did that. Lisa was sat just behind me and said, "Mothers always know." We smiled, and she stood up and we hugged, and she thanked me for helping them. This tiny moment of humour may sound incongruous, and it probably is. However, it is what actually happened. Amongst their hideous, unfathomable grief, some people found humour. None more so than the utterly remarkable Anders and Lise Bang Eriksson. And this is the greatest of one of the many strengths I would see over the coming days. At times their humour took me by surprise too. It was almost shocking. Yet their pain was constant and all too real. They are special, special people. Rumours and ghosts. Our role was becoming clearer. Hope and comfort are the currency of a disaster. It's what volunteers, helpers and professionals are there to give. As I'd said earlier, when you observe one death close-up, patterns are not clear. But when you see hundreds of people experiencing the same trauma, patterns emerge. We were being asked the same questions by everyone, and most of them were kind of indirectly aimed at supporting some hope they'd found. People were coming to us looking for hope, for ultimately, it's hope that brings some moments of comfort. I sloped off to a little area Peter had told me about where I could not be found, and Peter was there too. We had a long chat. I proposed to him that we were in the comfort and hope business, and he agreed. The next question then is how to deliver it. Peter said, by doing anything that brings it, everything that brings it. I reminded him of a famous nursing quote about pain. Pain is what the patient says it is when they say it is, and then bastardized it by changing the word pain for comfort and or hope. It was a bit of a eureka moment. Our role was to support people who came to us in any activity that brought them comfort or hope, regardless of whether we thought it was realistic, valuable, or even possible. It was not our purpose to evaluate the integrity or probability of a rumour or story. It was our role to facilitate the person presenting it to us with every resource and all the support they needed to investigate it, and, most importantly, investigate it to their satisfaction. A rumour wasn't dead to that person until they said it was. Along with this came the added responsibility of being with that person when the rumour was scotched or when the information was proven beyond all reasonable doubt to be false. We had to pick up the pieces and hold their hands for the next steps on that journey. These principles are what informed every interaction we had subsequently. We were getting some sort of direction and a purpose. We took an early lunch of the promised pizza paid for by Peter, which made it taste all the better, and presented the principles we talked about hope and comfort to the team, and asked if they agreed that this should be how we proceed. All agreed. Frank, a big American guy who runs a second-hand store on the island, added that we should only be giving real hope, as false hope is cruel in the long run. This was a good point, but I said that the ultimate arbiter of whether a rumour was true or false was the person who'd presented it to us and who asked for it to be investigated. Everyone agreed with that. Of course it's true. If we were going to be a source of information, then the accuracy of information was going to be very significant. And we needed to make sure that when we presented something to a victim that we'd investigated and found to be not true or impossible, we had to be sure, 100% sure, that it was true. We concluded that we needed to devote some time and resources to setting up a reliable and trustworthy reference team with outreach workers in each of the main locations at the hospitals and temples who we could contact instantly to check out sightings of people and other rumours. We had done some of that the previous day, but it wasn't formalised. It just felt like the right thing to do and people gravitated towards doing it. However, now we had names in every location. We had names and a phone in every location of people that we would trust to follow up every single lead that we sent them. This would ensure that we had great information and would remove the need for frequent trips by those who were searching to the various locations. We also resolved to keep some transportation and drivers, when we had them, open for people who wanted to check for themselves. I said I'd try to find more volunteers to go to Pangar, Phi and Khao. Within an hour, I had them. We had 2 new volunteers that day who were actually on holiday in Phuket, staying with a friend of mine, Ken, who was also volunteering. I made it clear I had a really boring job for them and they might not get to do anything at all. I asked them to go to Pangar Hospital and wait. They agreed instantly to go and stand by. They'd rented a car and had a mobile phone. This paid dividends on the same day. We had a guy who was separated from his wife on Phi Island. I don't know how, but like with many of the rumours we were presented with, He'd heard of an unconscious woman patient in Pangar Hospital matching his wife's description and who had red painted toenails. He said this really could be his wife, as she had red painted toenails, and this was not that common. I called the volunteers we'd sent to the hospital and asked them to check it out. They did locate a woman with red painted toenails within half an hour. She was, however, fully conscious and had been reunited with her family the day before. To be even more thorough, they asked if there were any other unconscious patients in the hospital. They couldn't get much sense out of the hospital administrators, so they conducted the first of many manual searches around the wards of the hospital. They didn't find any unconscious patients there, and they were absolutely sure that nobody fitting the missing woman's description was there, conscious or otherwise. Once I was sure that we had perfect information, I approached the man and broke the news to him. He was reassured by the fact that our volunteers had conducted their own search and was satisfied with the answer. He told me he had a few other leads to follow and said he'd come back later to let us know. He returned later that night to say that he'd found his wife's body. He showed me a picture of it. He found the picture on the website of the main public hospital in Phuket, Wachirat. He'd found her in the morgue there. In the picture, she looked asleep and calm. There was no obvious trauma to her body, and I could clearly see the bright red toenails. He told me he felt better now and was going to take her home the next day. He looked around the room. He said, "At least I know. How long will these poor people have to wait?" Once more I was astonished at the generosity of spirit displayed at what must have been a wretched time for him and his family. He told me that their 2 sons were waiting for him at home and asked if he could check his email on our machines. Of course he could. We didn't know it at the time, but the wait to be reconciled with a body would be, for many people, a very long time. So yeah, at least he knew. The Wachirat Hospital website was the first to start to post pictures of the dead and or their artifacts, or identifiable markings such as tattoos or scars. Thai people are more accustomed to gory images. It's just a cultural difference all over Asia. The front pages of the Thai tabloid newspapers carry a lurid picture daily on the front page, usually of some spectacular road accident, a gangland slaying, or a suicide pact. Often included in the pictures are members of whatever religious or social foundation that picked up the body, pointing at the significant wound or gunshot entry point with rubber-gloved hands, sometimes smiling. In every Thai town or village, there is usually a group of volunteers, often associated with the temple or sometimes a private group, who dedicate their evening to collecting bodies either from the many road accidents or often from acts of violence or suicide. They carry police scanners and typically have superior vehicles to the police and are often the first on the scene. In documentaries, I've heard their morbid activities usually attributed to Buddhism and the all-important concept of making merit, although I think a bit of the truth, if you dig deeper, is that Thai people are used to gore and are somewhat obsessed with ghosts. There are weekly or monthly magazines, such as the very popular Police Gazette, dedicated to showing pages and pages of horrific accidents and sudden traumatic deaths, and the Thai population are largely desensitized to such images. They're not bad people, it's just massively different here. Ghosts are very real all over Asia. I've struggled to explain how real they are to the Western mind. We Westerners have an idea of what a ghost is. We probably don't believe in them, we probably find them amusing or entertaining stories. Some people really do believe in them and hand over money to fraudulent people who say that they can speak to them. But on the whole, they're not really real to us, like they are to Asian people. Ghosts, or as they are known here, P, are seen every day, so often that they don't even make TV shows about having seen them. They are always there, they're a fact of life. The ghosts are fed and watered and ask for favours and blamed for problems and take possession of people and are generally a bit of a pest. Ghosts are more often created at the time of traumatic death, and most of the people who are involved in the collection of the dead see part of their role as avoiding the wrath of such spirits by treating them with respect and dignity when they collect the bodies. In this context, one can understand why the decision of Watcher at Hospital to post body pictures of Western corpses was an easy one for the time management to make. It would provoke a huge national debate in any Western country and simply would not be done. Because we were mainly Western volunteers, most were uncomfortable with it. However, the genie was already out of the bottle, and every person who was searching for a missing loved one knew about it. They would have viewed those pages on other computers if we hadn't allowed them to do it on ours. At least if they did so on one of our machines, we'd be close by to comfort them and arrange transport if they did find their loved one. We always offered to look for them and take details and then scour the site for possible matches. This was in order to minimise the trauma of looking through pages and pages of mutilated and bloated bodies of strangers. Most people declined and preferred to scroll through, silently horrified. It was hard to watch, and ultimately pointless, as no one that we knew, except the man who brought the site to our attention, found a loved one's body this way. Many more sites opened over the next few days from different areas where bodies were being collected, the largest being from the main temple in Khao Lak. One brilliant thing that Watchera had put together, and remember this is the third day, was a consolidated list from all the regional hospitals and some outpatient lists too. This became known as the Consolidated Hospitals List, an incredibly valuable resource. Tuesday, early evening. The BBC team were not employees of the corporation. They were from an independent company in Focus Asia, working for the BBC's Real Story programme. They behaved impeccably throughout the day and were respectful and unobtrusive, and very quickly I forgot that they were there. Occasionally the producer, Frank Smith, would ask me if I had time to come to one side and answer a few questions on camera, and sometimes this served as a welcome break. I learned that Frank had spent a good part of his career as a cameraman and producer in war zones. His recent work included a BBC series called Holidays in the Danger Zone, where he accompanied reporter Ben Anderson to some of the world's hottest spots. He was routinely at the business end of a Kalashnikov in Asia or Afghanistan, or being harassed by a drunk or stoned 12-year-old boy soldier at a checkpoint in Africa. He'd seen extremes of suffering. He'd lived on the margins, and like many in his branch of the profession, was trying to get over his addiction to it. His uncommon knowledge and insight was also a resource which I could plunder, and I did so unashamedly. He was generous to a fault and very patient with my ranting. He became my safety valve, and the moments I had with him sharing a cigarette after filming did a lot to keep me sane. He'd come in cold to the situation. I was full of adrenaline. I must have appeared quite mad at some times, but he was always there and always listened properly. His sense of humour was also a huge help to me. Frank became my reference point and a beacon home when all of this was over. Before I left the hospital that night, I saw Anders returning from a meeting which had been held with the Norwegian ambassador. He was making a beeline for me, and he was incandescent with rage. We went to the canteen, and one of the major political dramas of the whole disaster was about to begin. It turns out that many Norwegian people had been unsatisfied with the support that their embassy table at the hospital was providing with their ambassador, and had been granted one. It took place in the ballroom of the Pearl Hotel in Phuket Town. The Norwegian police had set up there, along with the Irish embassy, and what appeared to be a hidden Norwegian embassy office was located on the 11th floor. This office contained actual embassy staff and not an honorary consul. No one knew about it. This was 3 days after the wave hit. Anders told me he'd listened to a careful speech by their ambassador, and then the meeting was thrown open to question. Anders and several others had asked why the embassy was not doing more to help, and the ambassador asked them what they needed. They asked for mobile phones, computers, transport, and technical support. In fact, all the things that we were providing for them at our resource at the hospital. Quite rightly, they wanted their own embassy to provide them with the same resources. The ambassador, a slight bookish woman of quite a nervous appearance, was clearly out of her depth. This was shown very clearly by her political answer to this request. I have taken note of your concerns, and I've scheduled them for a meeting in 2 days' time to discuss what we can help with. Anders told me his response. My son is fucking missing, and you're scheduling a meeting about whether to give me a fucking mobile phone to help me find him in 2 days' time. My son is missing now. I'm not sure if that's what he actually said, but it is how he was reliving it to me afterwards. He continued, For Christ's sake, Trevor, this woman could have pulled enough money out of her handbag to buy 20 of them for all of us and wouldn't have missed the cash with the amount they earn. Norway is the richest country in the world. We lost everything in the wave. Money, clothes, and the shorts I'm wearing were given to me by a tuk-tuk driver. The flip-flops from someone else, and I don't even know where I got my shirt from. And I can't even get a phone from my own government. It's a joke. It really is a joke. I was somewhat appalled, but didn't show it. It wasn't my place. The meeting apparently ended very acrimoniously, with the assembled Norwegians out for blood. I did my best to put a good spin on it for him, and failed. I said that I don't believe his ambassador was trying to do a bad job, and that her intentions were probably good, and maybe her hands were tied too. Anders was almost mad at me for seeing the other side of it, but remained calm and said, This is not about her job, Trevor. This is about her humanity. And he was absolutely right. I wanted to distract him from his anger, so I suggested that we take a look at some websites together. He said he had another meeting to go to. The assembled Norwegians there had decided to have a meeting among themselves that night to work out a strategy for getting what they wanted from their own people. It was a bad sign. He then introduced me to a journalist who had accompanied him from the meeting. He told me that he was the top political writer for Norway's most populous newspaper, Dagbladet. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. This unsettled me. Funny I'd not seen him around before, but now there was a stink, they show up. I was polite and made my excuses and left. I tried not to think about it on the drive home. There were many distractions on the roads. They were full of army trucks and other transporters. Many were filled with debris. I must have seen dozens of trash cars being towed. Some with bits of trees sticking out of them, some caked in sand, and some with smashed windows, still matted with the blood of the unlucky occupants. I'd not been to the beach areas worst affected yet. I'd lived the entire 3 days after the wave either at the hospital or the pub or home. As was now my custom, I went straight to Pepper's. There was another reason to go. It was the quiz night, and I was the quiz master. It seems an obscenely normal thing to do in retrospect. The quiz passed without incident, its usual mix of good banter and gentle bravado. At the end of the quiz over the mic, I made a request for some more volunteers. I needed people to go to Kaulak and Pipi and Pangar to act as the reference team as discussed earlier. A group of lads who were regulars at the pub volunteered. Some had just returned to the island and were keen to do something to help. Some had had their consciences pricked by the willingness of others. Several agreed to meet at the pub at 7:30 a.m. the next day and make their way to the various destinations. The first to volunteer was one of the owners of the pub, Scouser Ian Redman. Ian's a really popular guy in the area, a genuine, bright, unaffected and funny bloke who apparently is also a wealthy man. This never showed. He was very down to earth. Actually, if it wasn't for his weakness for flash cars, you wouldn't know he had any money at all, especially from his shirt collection, which ranges from the just loud to the positively deck chair on acid. The next day would be one of the most difficult of his life so far, and that night I made my biggest mistake of the whole disaster.